Imagine this. You're enjoying a peaceful afternoon at your community pool, soaking up the sun, minding your own business, when suddenly, a wild HOA Karen appears, clutching her clipboard like it's the law of the land. She eyes you with disapproval, her lips pursed like she just smelled something offensive. Then out of nowhere she calls 911. Her emergency? In a bikini. At your own pool. But this isn't just about a swimsuit. It's about control, entitlement, and a Karen on the ultimate power trip. What starts as an absurd confrontation quickly escalates into full-blown HOA warfare, complete with fake violations, neighborhood gossip, and a petty tyrant who refuses to back down. Little does she know, she just picked the wrong person to mess with. What happens when a self-appointed HOA queen oversteps her power? And more importantly, how does the neighborhood fight back? Buckle up, because this is the ultimate tale of HOA havoc, Karen chaos, and the sweetest revenge imaginable. Hello beautiful people. Before we dive in, a small click from you can help us reach 1,000 subscribers. Hit that subscribe button and be part of the journey. Let's go. It was supposed to be a quiet summer afternoon. The sun was out, the birds were singing, and the community pool shimmered under the golden light. A perfect day for a swim, a little relaxation, and maybe even a moment of peace. Until peace was shattered by the unmistakable clack of sandals and the sharp, authoritative throat-clearing of Karen. Now every neighborhood has a Karen. The self-appointed enforcer of rules, the watchdog of suburban purity, the queen of cul-de-sacs who treats the HOA handbook like it's the sacred text of the land. And in my neighborhood, Karen took her role with a level of dedication that would make a drill sergeant look lazy. I had been living here for a few years, long enough to know that Karen thrived on confrontation. Her favorite pastimes included measuring grass heights with a ruler, peering over fences to ensure proper decorum, and issuing violation notices like they were going out of style. If there was an award for most HOA complaints filed in a month, Karen would have retired as an undisputed champion. But up until that day my interactions with her had been minimal. A passive-aggressive comment here, a suspicious glare there. Nothing more than minor irritations. That was about to change. I had just settled into my lounge chair at the pool, feeling the warmth of the sun on my skin, enjoying the simple pleasure of a good day. The water was cool, my stress was melting away, and for a moment, everything was perfect. But then I heard it, the sound of an impending Karen moment. The unmistakable shuffle of flip-flops approaching, an exaggerated gasp of disapproval, and then, "We need to talk." I barely had time to turn my head before Karen was looming over me like a school principal about to issue detention. She stood there, arms crossed, her signature clipboard clutched in one hand as if it were a weapon. Her expression was one of deep offense, as if my very existence had personally insulted her. "You know," she began, her tone dripping with condescension, "this pool is for residents only." I blinked at her, momentarily thrown off by the sheer ridiculousness of the statement. "I am a resident, Karen." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Well, yes, but I mean, I don't think the HOA approved this." She gestured vaguely at me like I was some sort of illegal installation. I looked down at myself, confused. "Swimsuit? Pool chair? HOA approved? Also check. Karen, it's a swimsuit. At a pool. What exactly isn't approved here?" Her nose scrunched as if she had just smelled something offensive. "It's just, this is a family-friendly space and I don't know if this is appropriate." I stared at her. It took me a second to realize what she was implying. She wasn't just making a fuss over a swimsuit. She was making a fuss over me, over the fact that I, a disabled person, dared to exist at her community pool in a bikini. I felt a flash of disbelief, followed by the kind of exasperation that only Karen could inspire. "You can't be serious." "Oh, I'm quite serious," she replied, her eyes narrowing. "I mean, is this even safe for you? You shouldn't be here alone. What if something happens? I really think the HOA should have a policy about..." "Karen." I cut her off before she could dig herself deeper into whatever ableist nonsense she was about to spew. "I don't need permission to be at my own pool." "Well, I just think..." "And I don't need your concern. I've been swimming longer than you've been enforcing imaginary rules. That should have been the end of it. Any reasonable person would have just huffed and walked away." But Karen didn't believe in reasonable. She believed in escalation. "I don't think you understand," she snapped, her voice rising in indignation. "I'm going to have to report this." "To who?" I asked, genuinely curious. The pool police? She pulled out her phone, fingers flying over the screen. To the HOA, of course. And, if necessary, the authorities. I stared at her in sheer disbelief. You're going to call the cops? On what grounds? Existing in a swimsuit. Karen, undeterred, turned her back to me and pressed the phone to her ear. Yes, hello, I'd like to report an unauthorized person at the community pool. Yes, right now. She shot me a victorious look as if she had just won some great battle. And just like that, my peaceful afternoon took a sharp turn into absurdity. The thing about Karen is that she thrives on control. It's not enough for her to be mildly annoyed by something. No, she has to fix it to bend the universe to her will, even when nobody asked her to. And in this case, her mission was to rid her community pool of what she had personally deemed an unauthorized presence. I watched, still dripping from my swim, as she paced near the pool's entrance, phone pressed to her ear. She was speaking in hushed but urgent tones, occasionally glancing back at me as if I were some sort of criminal loitering on sacred ground. Now, I've had my fair share of ridiculous HOA encounters, but watching Karen call 911 over my existence in a bikini was a new level of petty. I'm telling you, it's a safety issue, she said into the phone, voice sharp with manufactured concern. She really shouldn't be here. It's not appropriate. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity, but there was something deeply unsettling about the way she said it. Like she genuinely believed that my body, my presence, was something that needed to be removed. When she finally hung up, she turned back to me with a smug, satisfied look, as if she had just done the neighborhood some grand public service. They'll be here soon, she announced, arms crossed over her chest. Who? I asked, raising an eyebrow. The police, she said, like it was the most natural response in the world. For what? I threw my hands up. For swimming. For violating HOA regulations, she said, though even she didn't seem confident in her own words. What regulation? She faltered for only a second before recovering. It's common sense. The pool has rules about conduct and safety, and I really don't think you should be in here without someone supervising you. There was the veiled ableism wrapped up in fake concern. I could feel my patience slipping. Karen, I said, trying to keep my voice even, I don't need supervision. I'm a grown adult who knows how to swim. Well, I don't feel comfortable with this. I let out a short laugh. Good news, you don't have to. Because my existence doesn't require your approval. Karen huffed, clutching her clipboard tighter, probably wishing she had an actual law to throw at me. Just then one of my neighbors, Tom, strolled by, taking in the scene with raised eyebrows. Everything okay here? Not really, I said. Karen here just called the cops because she doesn't like that I'm at the pool. Tom blinked. Then slowly a grin spread across his face. Wait, you called 911? For this? Karen's lips pursed. It's an HO matter. No, it's a you matter, Tom corrected. And you just wasted emergency services time because you're, what? Offended by a swimsuit? She turned red but didn't back down. This is a community space and we have standards. Yeah, Tom said, nodding. The standard being that people are allowed to use the pool they pay for. Karen let out a sharp breath through her nose, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. She wasn't used to pushback. She was used to people nodding along, agreeing just to avoid the headache. But I wasn't about to be one of them. A few minutes later, the police actually showed up. 2 officers looking mildly annoyed and very much like they had better things to do. One of them adjusted his sunglasses, scanning the scene like he was expecting to find some kind of crime in progress. We got a call about a disturbance? Karen immediately stepped forward, all righteous indignation. Yes. She's in the pool and I really don't think it's safe for her to be here alone. The officers looked at me, looked at the pool, looked back at Karen. So the disturbance is swimming, one of them asked, barely masking his disbelief. It's an HOA violation, Karen insisted. The second officer turned to me, clearly unimpressed. Ma'am, are you a resident here? Yep. You're a member of this community? Yep. Do you have any outstanding violations that prohibit you from using the pool? Nope. The first officer let out a slow sigh. Hey. So, what exactly is the problem? Karen, now realizing that she might not have the law on her side, fumbled for words. I don't think it's appropriate. That's not really a crime, the officer said flatly. Tom, who was now thoroughly enjoying the show, let out a low whistle. Wow. You really wasted police time for this, huh? Karen's face turned an even deeper shade of red. I was just trying to protect the community. Aha, the officer muttered. Well, unless there's an actual issue here, we're gonna have to ask you to stop misusing emergency services. Karen's mouth snapped shut. Have a nice day, the officer added, nodding to me before the two of them turned and walked off, shaking their heads. I turned back to Karen, arms crossed. So, what did we learn today? She glared at me for a long moment before stomping off, muttering something under her breath about respect and proper conduct. Tom chuckled beside me. You know she's gonna double down after this, right? Oh, absolutely. Because if there was one thing I knew for certain, it was that Karen never admitted defeat. The best way to deal with someone like Karen is not to fight fire with fire. No, that's what she wants. She thrives on drama, feeds off of every ounce of frustration she causes. The only way to really get under her skin is to do the one thing she hates more than anything else. Not care. So, naturally, I made it a point to go back to the pool the very next day. This time I brought extras. An obnoxiously large, colorful beach towel, the most neon swimsuit I could find, and a giant inflatable flamingo that absolutely positively was not HOA approved. If I was going to be a menace in Karen's eyes, I might as well lean into it. I didn't have to wait long. Like clockwork, Karen appeared, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning the pool as if she were on the lookout for unsanctioned fun. The second she saw me, her expression twisted into something between outrage and sheer disbelief. You're back, she said, as if I'd violated some unspoken exile. I live here, Karen. She let out a sharp breath through her nose. Well, I hope today you'll at least follow the rules. I always follow the rules. I gestured to the flamingo float. No official rule against fun, is there? Her eye twitched. Inflatables are a safety hazard. Interesting, I mused, glancing around. Because I see 3 other kids in the pool with floaties and you don't seem to have a problem with them. She scowled, clearly searching for a comeback, but before she could, Tom, my new favorite neighbor, piped up from a lounge chair. You know, Karen, I was just reading the HOA guidelines and there's nothing in there about pool floats. Unless you're planning to rewrite the rules. Karen shot him a death glare, but Tom just grinned. I had to hand it to him, he knew exactly how to push her buttons in the best way possible. I'll be speaking with the HOA about this, she huffed. Of course you will, I said, leaning back onto my floa tie like I had all the time in the world. That would have been the end of it, except Karen wasn't done. No, she had official paperwork to back up her nonsense. The next day, an official violation notice appeared in my mailbox. Subject: unauthorized use of pool area and disruptive conduct. According to Karen's latest masterpiece of HOA fiction, I was guilty of bringing unauthorized objects, the flamingo, to the pool, creating a hostile environment, by existing apparently, encouraging noncompliance with HOA regulations, translation, not letting her boss me around. It was so ridiculous I actually laughed. She had written this up like I was some kind of poolside anarchist. Since Karen wanted to play bureaucratic nonsense, I decided to play along. I grabbed a pen and wrote back in the most overly professional tone I could muster. Dear Karen, I appreciate your deep concern for the safety and decorum of our beloved community. However, after carefully reviewing the HOA guidelines, I am unable to find any clauses regarding the prohibition of flamingo-shaped inflatables. If you could kindly provide the exact documentation outlining this restriction, I would be happy to comply. Additionally, I must formally request clarification on the hostile environment charge, as I am unaware of any actions that would constitute such behavior. If smiling, lounging, and swimming fall under this category, I fear we may all be in violation. Sincerely, a deeply concerned resident. I printed it out, signed it, and personally delivered it to Karen's mailbox. She didn't respond, at least not immediately. But the next time I walked past her house, I caught her peering through her blinds, clutching her clipboard like it was a shield. I gave her a wave. She did not wave back. Word spread fast. By the time I made my next trip to the pool, it seemed like half the neighborhood had heard about the Great Flamingo Incident, as Tom was now calling it. I wasn't even the one telling people. Karen was doing it for me. She had gone door to door, spreading her version of events like a suburban town crier. She's disrupting the community, she told Mrs. Jenkins, the sweet elderly lady down the street. She's corrupting the pool rules, she hissed to a group of parents at the park. She's encouraging anarchy, she dramatically declared at the last HOA meeting, clutching her clipboard like a Bible. By the time the rumors reached me, they were so exaggerated that even I had to admire Karen's dedication to the bit. "Hey, I heard you installed a full water slide at the pool," one of my neighbors, Beth, joked. "I heard you're personally responsible for driving down property values," another added with mock seriousness. "You guys are way off," Tom said, shaking his head. "I heard she trained seagulls to attack Karen on sight." We all burst into laughter. Not everyone, of course, found it funny. A handful of HOA loyalists sided with Karen, nodding along as she went on her crusade for order. "She's just looking out for the neighborhood," one neighbor, Bob, said in a hushed voice, though he avoided making direct eye contact. "Yeah," his wife Linda added. "Rules exist for a reason." "What rule did I break?" I asked, turning to face them. They both hesitated. "Well," Bob scratched his head. Karen said. "Ah," I interrupted. "So no actual rule. Just Karen's interpretation of one?" They had no response. The thing was, even the people who agreed with Karen weren't really convinced by her logic. They were just afraid of her. She'd built this reputation as the HOA's self-appointed enforcer, and people just went along with it to avoid being targeted. But now people were starting to realize something important. She had no real power. And they were starting to push back. At the next HOA meeting, one of the residents, Mark, stood up and casually asked, "Hey, do we actually have any rules against pool floats?" The HOA president, a tired-looking woman who had clearly dealt with Karen one too many times, sighed and shuffled through her binder. "No. There's no specific rule about pool floats." Karen's eye twitched. "But they're implied under the general safety." "There's no rule," the HOA president repeated, not even bothering to look at her. Karen's face turned red. "So if there's no rule," Mark continued, "does that mean the violation notice Karen sent out was unofficial?" The HOA president finally glanced up, narrowing her eyes. "What notice?" The entire room went silent. Karen shifted uncomfortably in her seat. I was just enforcing reasonable guidelines." The president's gaze hardened. "Karen, you don't have enforcement power. You're not even on the board." The silence stretched for an awkward beat. Then Tom, sitting a few seats away, coughed the word awkward under his breath. A few people chuckled. Karen shot him a glare, then turned her attention back to the HOA president. "Well, if I'm not going to enforce the rules, who will?" The HOA president rubbed her temples. "Karen, we have actual HOA board members for that." It was the first time I'd ever seen Karen speechless. She huffed, crossed her arms, and sat back in her chair, steam practically coming out of her ears. After the meeting, a few neighbors quietly approached me. "Hey, we just wanted to say we're kinda sick of Karen too," one whispered. "I always thought she had actual authority," another admitted. Tom just grinned. "Welcome to the resistance." From that moment on, things started to shift. More neighbors started casually ignoring Karen's ridiculous rules. Someone put up a neon pink lawn flamingo, purely out of spite. Another neighbor, emboldened by the chaos, left their trash cans out for an extra hour past pickup time. A petty rebellion, but a rebellion nonetheless. The HOA wasn't crumbling. The community wasn't falling into anarchy. The only thing breaking down was Karen's illusion of control. And she was about to lose it completely. Karen was unraveling. Her usual tricks weren't working anymore. People were pushing back, questioning her authority, and worst of all, ignoring her. And Karen could not handle being ignored. So she did what any self-righteous, power-hungry HOA wannabe dictator would do. She doubled down. The next time I went to the pool, I noticed something new. A printed sign laminated and zip-tied to the fence. Pool rules. No glass containers. No running. No loud music. No inflatables. It didn't take a genius to figure out who put that last rule there. I raised an eyebrow, then turned to Tom, who was lounging nearby. "Is this an actual rule?" He smirked. "Not officially." I stared at the sign for a moment, then without breaking eye contact with Tom, pulled out a pair of scissors from my bag, walked over and snipped the zip ties right off. Karen, who had been lurking nearby, gasped like I had just committed a felony. "You can't do that," she shrieked, storming over. "I sure can," I said, holding up the sign. "Since this isn't real and you don't actually have the authority to make rules." Her face turned red. It's a safety measure. No, I corrected, it's you throwing a tantrum because you lost. For a moment she looked like she was going to combust. But then she composed herself and did what Karen always does when she doesn't get her way. She threatened to call the HOA. Except this time she wasn't going to stop there. Later that evening a letter appeared in my mailbox. A formal HOA complaint. I wasn't even surprised. But the thing about this complaint? It wasn't just about unauthorized pool accessories or disruptive behavior. No, this time Karen had gone nuclear. Complaint filed. Unauthorized use of amenities and violation of HOA standards. Resident has repeatedly violated community standards by bringing disruptive and inappropriate items to the pool area. Resident has demonstrated a pattern of hostility toward HOA representatives. Resident has failed to maintain property standards as observed by multiple board members. The last one made me laugh out loud. My lawn was perfectly fine, better than Karen's in fact. But that didn't matter. She was grasping at straws, trying to throw as many accusations at me as possible in the hopes that something would stick. What she didn't know was that I had been collecting evidence against her for weeks. So, I did what any rational person would do. I gathered up all the nonsense complaints she'd sent me, all the fake violations she'd written, and every single recorded HOA rule that she had broken herself. Because funny enough, Karen wasn't exactly innocent when it came to rule breaking. She had an unapproved security camera angled directly at a neighbor's backyard. She had decorative lawn ornaments that weren't HOA approved. And best of all, she had an illegal mailbox color that didn't match the standard. I compiled everything into a neat little folder, printed it out and brought it to the next HOA meeting. When it was my turn to speak, I calmly walked up to the front, cleared my throat and handed the president my stack of paperwork. I'd like to formally report a resident who has been violating multiple HOA regulations and falsely reporting others, I said, voice steady. Karen, who had been sitting smugly with her arms crossed, suddenly stiffened. The HOA president flipped through the papers. Her expression changed immediately. Karen, she said, looking up, is this true? Karen's mouth opened and closed. I was only trying to enforce. You're not on the enforcement committee, the president interrupted. And you have multiple violations of your own. For the first time, Karen had no comeback. Effective immediately, the HOA president continued, you are no longer allowed to issue complaints on behalf of the HOA, and you will be receiving a formal citation for your own violations. The room erupted. Some people laughed. Others muttered in satisfaction. And Karen? She stormed out. I leaned back in my seat enjoying the moment. Justice had been served. Karen disappeared for a few days after the HOA meeting. No dramatic confrontations, no clipboard-wielding patrols around the neighborhood, not even a passive-aggressive Facebook post about certain residents ruining the community. It was eerie. Then just when I started to think she might be plotting something, the final blow came. A bright orange violation notice appeared on Karen's own front door. Word spread like wildfire. By mid-morning, a small group of neighbors had casually gathered outside her house, pretending to check their mail or water their plants while stealing glances at the notice. Tom, being the hero he is, had no shame. He walked right up to the door, squinted at the paper and let out a whistle. Well, he said, grinning. Looks like someone finally got a taste of their own medicine. It turned out that Karen had racked up multiple actual HOA violations over the years. But since she had positioned herself as the neighborhood enforcer, nobody had dared call her out on them. Till now. The violations included non-HOA approved mailbox color, the exact rule she tried to get me on. Unapproved decorative lawn ornaments, her prized cement angel statues. A security camera pointed directly at a neighbor's backyard, major privacy violation. Failure to seek HOA approval for exterior modifications. She had repainted her shutters without submitting paperwork. The best part? She was being fined $500 for multiple infractions, plus an official warning that if she didn't correct the issues within 30 days, additional fines would follow. Karen was livid. By the time she finally stepped outside to snatch the notice off her door, she was fuming. Face red, jaw clenched, hands shaking. You, she hissed, eyes locking onto me as if I had personally orchestrated her downfall. I raised my hands in mock innocence. Hey, I don't make the rules. The HO does. Tom, barely holding back laughter, added, And we all know how important it is to follow the rules, Karen. A few neighbors chuckled. Someone actually clapped. Karen's mouth opened and closed a few times before she spun on her heel, stomped back into her house and slammed the door. Over the next few weeks, things in the neighborhood changed. The HOA, now keenly aware that Karen had been overstepping her role for years, started cracking down on her nonsense. She was no longer allowed to issue notices, her complaints were heavily scrutinized, and every time she tried to raise a new concern, the board practically ignored her. And the residents? They thrived. The community pool suddenly saw an increase in inflatable flamingo usage. Tom put up a giant tacky pink lawn gnome on his front yard just to spite her. Someone even made a Karen-free zone sign as a joke and taped it to the pool gate for a day. Karen, now powerless, faded into irrelevance. She stopped patrolling the streets, stopped filing nonsense complaints, and eventually put her house up for sale. By the end of the summer she was gone. And the neighborhood? It was never better. Karen's house sold faster than anyone expected. One day she was stomping around, grumbling about community standards, and the next a moving truck was parked in her driveway, carrying out all the remnants of her reign of terror. No one threw a farewell party. No one waved as she drove away. But the second her car turned the corner and disappeared down the street, the neighborhood practically exhaled in relief. Tom, ever the instigator, brought out a cooler of drinks and set up some lawn chairs in his driveway. So, he said, cracking open a soda, I'm thinking we all pitch in and get the new owners a flamingo float as a housewarming gift. Everyone laughed, but we actually did it. When the new family moved in, a young couple with a toddler and a dog, the first thing waiting for them on their doorstep was a brand new inflatable flamingo, courtesy of the entire community. They thought it was hilarious. And as for the HOA? With Karen gone, things calmed down. Rules were enforced reasonably, not like a personal vendetta. The pool became a place of actual relaxation, free of clipboard inspections. People felt comfortable putting up small decorations, leaving their trash bins out an extra hour, and generally living their lives without the fear of a random complaint letter showing up in their mailbox. The funniest part? The mailbox Karen had complained about never got repainted. The HOA forgot about it. Or maybe, just maybe, they didn't really care to begin with. It was only ever Karen who did. The neighborhood, now finally Karen-free, felt lighter. And as I floated in the pool one afternoon, basking in the sun, I smiled. Peace at last. Have you ever had a ridiculous HOA experience or dealt with a Karen in your neighborhood? What happened? If you were in my shoes, how would you have responded when Karen called 911 over something this absurd? Do you think HOAs actually help communities, or are they just power trips for people like Karen? What's the most petty rule you've ever heard of in a neighborhood or workplace? Would you have fought back like I did, or just ignored Karen and let her dig her own grave? What's your take? Should there be rules about pool floats and decorations, or should people be free to enjoy their space?